All right. We're going to really confuse you guys this morning. I'm not leaving the stage. I told you I'm so excited. So you guys have a seat. I know you're starting to wonder, okay, where is Andrew gone? Where's the band at? We have weird, I say weird, they're really nice. I'm going to take them, put them on my screen porch. Andrew, yeah. But, we've got these chairs. There's nobody in the drum cage. What's going on? Well, we're mixing things up. We like to keep you guys on your toes. We like to keep ourselves on our toes. And plus, half the band, we give them the morning off. Got to let them relax every now and then. But if you guys weren't with us last week, we started a new series, 5 Things That Will Destroy Your Marriage. And what did we talk about last week? I'll give you a little quiz. Nope. Leftovers, that's right. We're talking about the fact that if you're giving your spouse leftovers in time, energy, devotion, love, slowly but surely you start to deteriorate a little bit of love, a little bit of trust, and it breaks down the walls in that marriage, and we don't want that. So our first item, the first thing that we find destroying our marriages is leftovers, and obviously not food, but leftovers in our devotion and love to our spouse. And so now we're getting into week 2. But before I jump into that, I want to remind you guys that in the drop boxes on either side of the sanctuary where you can give your donations, I also want you for week 6 to write down some questions you may have and send those to me. It's going to be anonymous. I'm not going to call you out and say, so-and-so wants to know. I won't do that to you up here. So please give some questions, because if not, then week 6, I guess you guys just going to have to hear me talk about duck hunting or something. I don't know. Well, so that's your choice. Some of you guys may like that, but I'm not going to do that to you. So week 6, it is a 5-week series in itself, because what is it? 5 things that would destroy your marriage. So week 6 will be questions that you may have that I wasn't able to answer. We're going to try our best. I might get Andrew up here to help me on that week. Hammer out some issues about marriage, about what marriage is in the Christian perspective, because this world's got a lot of miscued understandings of what marriage is. And so week 6, again, I need your help. Just drop in any questions anonymously in the drop boxes, or you can hand them to me after service. But again, the 5 things that will destroy your marriage, because it's something that's important to any of us, whether you've been married for many years, whether you are recently married, still in the honeymoon phase, or maybe you think right now, that's not even in the back of my mind. Well, maybe as time goes on, as you mature, marriage is a very viable option, and I hope it is for you, because it is a wonderful blessing from God. So it's something fitting for each and every one of us. And therefore, it's that much more important for us to look at things that we can avoid to maintain a healthy relationship, to maintain, most importantly, a godly marriage. Because if God's not in the picture, then you really start to wonder, what is the focus in this relationship? Is it me? Is it my wife? Or am I really giving it to God? We're going to get more into that next week. But this week, I'm going to be talking about expectations. Life in itself is full of expectations. We assume and we hope for certain expectations with literally everything we do. For me, if I've got a hunt lined up, for instance, I've got expectations that it's going to be an amazing hunt. It doesn't always work out that way. Also, with now as a father, I have expectations of how my child is going to be as he grows up. I have expectations of how the type of father I want to be. Every stage of my life, every stage of your life, we have expectations. And that's why today we're a little bit different for you guys, because you came in here at church with expectations, didn't you? You expected to hear the band start out with a song, because that's what we always do. And so with me being up here first, you're like, hold on, my expectations aren't being met. What's going on up here? What's different? Well, what we're given is really kind of a picture or a metaphor for life, because so often when we come into a situation with these high expectations, or even just simple expectations at all, when we find out that those expectations aren't met, we get a little on edge. We get almost sometimes angry. We get disappointed. We get mad at ourselves or mad at others, because either they're not living up to our standards and our expectations, or we haven't met our own goals. And so this morning, We wanted this picture, this metaphor of expectations as a picture of life and as a picture of, things that we set ahead of us, goals that we set in our life and in our relationships, because so often we can hurt ourselves with expectations, and we can also help ourselves. But it depends on where your mind is and how you align your life and how you align your goals and your purpose with those expectations. One great example I found that I want to share with you guys was this kid. He set great expectations. He knew where his purpose was. He knew where his place was. And he met those expectations head on, and he wasn't afraid of it. It took place the first day of basketball practice at Wingate High School, which is in Brooklyn. The coach, Jack Keimer, he handed the ball to each player. He said, okay, guys, I want you to practice shooting from the spot you might expect to be in during the game. I want you to find that spot, and I want you to start practicing from that location. Number 12 grabbed the ball, went to the bench, and started shooting, sitting down on the bench. He knew where he was going to be. He didn't have high expectations. He knew, okay, I'm not the best player on the team. He said, I'm probably going to be on the bench, so that's where I'm going to go sit down and I'm going to shoot. So he understood where he was, and he didn't set too high standards for himself, and he didn't try to get these expectations that were way too far out of reach. Unlike a lot of us, when we shoot for the moon, we shoot for the stars, with all these great goals in mind, we're kind of like this congressman. He said, in my first term of Congress, I wanted to save the world. In my second term, I wanted to save the United States. In my third term, I wanted to save Michigan. Now, at the end of my fourth term, if I can just save those sand dunes on Lake Michigan, I'll be a happy man. It's all because at first he came in with so much gusto, with so much excitement for his job, for serving the country, for serving the state of Michigan, that he was shooting for the moon. He was shooting with all these high expectations. And again, it's a picture of how we live, isn't it? We way too often stretch a little too far on our expectations, and we wind up short, don't we? And when that happens, we get mad, we get disappointed, we get down on ourselves, and we beat ourselves up as if it's the end of the road, the end of the world, because my big expectations weren't met, and therefore, some cases we give up. But the worst thing that we see, what I want to call like a worst case scenario, and it happens a lot, is when we put expectations on others without ever telling them, and therefore, if we set a high goal, a high standard, a high expectation for somebody else, and just keep it assumed that they're going to understand, they're going to read my mind, and if they don't meet my expectations, then I get angry with them. I get upset with them because you didn't do what I wanted you to. You haven't lived out the way I wanted you to. I wanted this, for instance, our relationship to be different. But if it's unspoken, how do we blame somebody else? How do we put these expectations on somebody else without ever bringing it up, without ever telling them about it? And we see this over and over in our relationships, and especially in marriages, because everyone, regardless of, again, age when you get to the point of marriage, or whether your background, doesn't matter. You all come into marriage with certain expectations. And even if you've been married for many years, you have expectations for your spouse. There's things that you expect your spouse to do. There's things in that relationship that you expect from your spouse. But too often, if we keep it quiet, we keep those assumed expectations, then things can get a little out of hand. We can allow those expectations to break down barriers in our relationship. They can tear down trust in the relationship, and it ends up hurting us. These expectations, we get them based off of our families. We see how our parents' relationships were, our grandparents' relationships, aunt and uncles. We get an understanding of how they expected marriage and what they expect to receive from one another. But also, way too often, we get these preconceived and really misunderstood expectations from sitcoms, movies, from TV shows, from these glamorous understandings of what a relationship is. And so we put these high standards, these high expectations on our spouse without ever saying a word to them, based on these very vague, a lot of times insecure understandings of what marriage is. And guys, one thing that really hurts you and it hurts in multiple ways, but especially in marriage. If you've been watching or looking and viewing porn or anything that gives you a misunderstanding of the intimacy in your relationship, it's going to hurt you down the road, because you get these preconceived notions of, okay, this is how my love life is supposed to be. No. You're drawing these expectations on your wife, on your spouse, based off something you shouldn't be viewing to start with. The second, something based purely on lust and nothing on love. So that's the really severe side. But even you say, oh, I just watch, what's the new shows nowadays? I don't know. I'm still on like Friends and Seinfeld, but I'm still watching those. But what show? Andrew keeps up with a few of them. But you get the picture. It's these preconceived understandings of a marriage based on a TV show, based on these two characters. And their relationship, is so perfect behind the scenes. It's so perfect on camera. And so we place those expectations on our spouse, whether present or future. And so the difficulty comes when we put these expectations that are often very poorly defined and sometimes completely unknown to our spouse. We just leave it at that. For example, I got some good examples for you that you hear over and over in a relationship and between couples that are often unspoken. The first one is, I expect my husband that he will discuss and resolve disagreements in a logical manner. I expect my wife to be excited about making love with me every night. I expect my wife will nurture. Going too fast for me? Yeah, I know. You can hit pause on it. I expect that my wife will remain. It's still going. And you hit. There you go. It's so many expectations. I can't even keep up with them. It's automatic. It's the same with technology. I can't keep up with technology. But I'll read them for you. You saw them. I expect my wife to be excited about making love with me every night. I expect that my wife will nurture and comfort me when I am ill. I expect that my husband will climb the corporate ladder and make ever-increasing amounts of money. I expect that my wife will remain slim and shapely throughout our marriage. I expect that my husband will take pleasure in sharing the events of the day when he gets home. I expect to have dinner waiting for me when I get home. Some of you guys do that. I don't know. I expect that my husband will do his fair share of household maintenance. I expect to entertain a large army of family members at all major holidays. And all of these, yes, you say, well, they're not that big of a deal. What we run into, though, is a lot of these preconceived assumptions in the relationship remain unspoken. They remain just simply assumed. And so if I seriously, for instance, told Allison that when I got home I expected dinner to be ready, if I told her that, she would be like, well, you've got high expectations that aren't going to be met. At least they're out in the open. But if day after day I'm assuming that dinner's going to be there, and I slowly simmer on the fact that, man, she doesn't love me, my dinner's not ready, I got to wait an hour after I get home. Yeah, you say that's petty and that's silly. But if you have that unspoken expectation on your wife or your spouse, and it slowly over time continues to build, there's going to be that one day when all she thought she did was fail to make dinner on time. You're going to fly off the handle on her, and she's like, it's just meatloaf. What is wrong with you? And what it is preconceived expectations on the relationship that remain unspoken. And when they remain unspoken, we're just putting these stipulations on our relationship and on our spouse that really do no good to us, because one, they're not going to be met if we don't speak it, and two, we let those things simmer and we let those things build up until we reach the boiling point. And so you can start to see why, even yes, maybe you think they're not that big of a deal as far as an expectation, such as entertaining the entire family during all holidays. I know my wife likes to do that, and that's okay, but I know that. And I also tell her that we can't do that very often. We hit a middle ground, and that's okay. But if over time, just as with dinner, if she continued to want to have these family get-togethers without telling me, then you can see how, as humans join together, fighting, arguing, it builds upon one another, all because her expectations are assumed, and my expectations for her on how often we should do this, again, is assumed, and we're not coming together in agreement, and therefore we're allowing these expectations to hurt our relationship, to hurt our marriage. And so expectations by themselves are not a bad thing. But again, we have to be clear. We have to be open about them. But also we have to be realistic about it, because a lot of those that we just talked about, they're a little too, again, shooting for the moon. If you got that worked out in your relationship, great. But way too often we're a little overambitious, aren't we? Especially in our relationship. But there are expectations that you should come to see in a relationship, and that's a good thing. They're healthy. But I've come up with a list for you, expectations that you can look forward to or you can expect in a relationship that are a little bit more realistic. And so when you see these happening in your relationship, in your marriage, that it's not a surprise. It's not something that blows you away and that you think, oh, my marriage isn't perfect, therefore we need to get a divorce. She's not the right one. It's too difficult. We give up way too quick when all it is we're assuming these expectations on our spouse that really aren't realistic. Some of the more realistic ones is you're going to have challenges with finances. That's normal. That's okay. You're going to have difficulty relating to the opposite sex. We're different people. We have different understanding of things. So at first, and even people that have been married many years, a lot of times they just give up and say, I don't even talk to her anymore. I've heard older couples do that. I don't suggest it. In-law strains, hopefully you don't, but you may. Spiritual growth, that's going to be a challenge. I want my spiritual growth on my own, but I want spiritual growth with my wife and with my family. How do I prioritize that? How do I fit that into my life? Trying to define roles as husband and wife. This is a new playing field for you guys. You're going to have challenges defining who does what, who shares in this activity, this responsibility, this job. You're going to have communication challenges. Again, differences between men and women and how we communicate and how we perceive something that is communicated to us. We may take it completely different than it was expected to be. We have decisions on values, lifestyle differences. We're going to have trials and suffering. You're going to have to make decisions on where to attend church, hopefully access point. You're going to have to figure out the differences in your religious, gender, and backgrounds. We're different people, and especially when it comes to religion. If you came from two different religious backgrounds, that can tear in and build divisions in the relationship, in the marriage. And at first, the first year, it's not that big a deal. We'll split up time. But after a while, I want to go here, and I want to go here. This is where my family's always been. Well, this is where I feel I fit in better. If we don't tackle those issues, it can cause division. Yes, so church can create rifts in a relationship, so you have to figure those things out. Also, travel, vacation options. You've been used to being able to do your own time, do your own thing. Now you're a family unit. How are you going to do that? Debt concerns. Maybe she's brought debt into a relationship. More often than not, he's brought debt into the relationship. You're going to have to make decisions on your children. If we're going to have children, and when we do, if Lord's willing, how do we discipline our children? That's a big division in marriages, and that's one of the big things I tell couples in premarital counseling is you have to be upfront from the beginning, because if one is expecting to use spanking as a form of discipline and the other one's not, and you go and spank that child in front of them, they may get hot at you and you're like, I didn't know. Well, get those out in the open. Those are expectations that you need to take care of. You need to talk about. There's decisions on traditions. It goes back to those backgrounds. Work, career struggles, priority alignment, sexual intimacy. There's differences in men and women on frequency of and the type of intimacy needed. I just want to talk. Well, maybe there's disagreements on that. Talk about those things. Handle those. Assuming new roles as mother and father. Conflict resolution, and then struggles with selfishness. You've been used to being on your own. You're either a bachelor or bachelorette. Now you're a family unit. Those are issues you have to hammer out, you have to deal with. So these are expectations that you can come to expect. You can come to see in a relationship. It's normal. It's okay. So when these divisions come, it doesn't mean it's the end of the relationship, even though these struggles are difficult. These times do make a little bit of a rough patch in the relationship. And regardless of how long you've been married, it is hard. But I want to look at our focal passage, which is 1 Corinthians 13. You know, you're all familiar with it. If you weren't here last week, it's the chapter on love. And I truly believe if we focus on the understanding of love that Scripture gives us, if we focus on this mindset, then these expectations or these preconceived expectations and assumed expectations will hopefully be resolved in a very kindly and friendly, loving manner, because we're not being selfish. We're focused on one another. We're focused on showing this true love that we have for our spouse. So again, we're reading out of the Message. If you want to follow in your Bible, or it's going to be on the screen. Love never gives up. Love cares more for others than for self. Love doesn't want what it doesn't have. Love doesn't strut. Love, it doesn't have a swelled head. Doesn't force itself on others. Isn't always me first. Doesn't fly off the handle. Doesn't keep score of the sins of others. Doesn't revel when others grovel. Takes pleasure in the flowering of truth. Puts up with anything. Trusts God always. Always looks for the best. Never looks back, but keeps going to the end. Can you imagine if that was your marriage? It's utopian, isn't it? It's perfect. And that's because that's the true picture of love. That's how our relationship should work. But again, like I said last week, we start thinking, okay, that's honeymoon phase. Give me these passages in 10, 20 years and tell me how good you are at it then. And the sad reality is, yes, we get lazy, we get complacent in the relationship. And although we say, oh, I love her more today than I ever have, some of these issues, these expectations, whether it's leftovers or whether it's just disagreements, we allow it to tear down these loving feelings that we have for one another. And that's when you see couples spending long periods of time apart from one another. They're not separated, but they're surely not communicating. They're not spending that quality time together because, well, it's, as we talked about last week, it's getting boring. It's the flame isn't there like it used to be. I want to get back to like it was when we were dating. And again, why don't you? You both say, oh, I'd like to see it get back to that. Then why don't you? And it's all because we're not focused on love in this picture. We're not focused on love in the way that God gives us a picture of love. And so I've highlighted a couple these key passages that really, when it comes to expectations, would help us realign ourselves, realign our thoughts to help hopefully realign our marriage, whether it's present or future. So the first one, if love truly never gives up, and I brought this up last week, if love never gives up, when our expectations aren't met, that means we're going to work through it. We're going to hammer out these issues. I'm going to talk to you about the fact that, hey, I had really high expectations on you, baby, and you didn't meet them. Well, I'm sorry you had these expectations, but let's talk about it. I love you, and I want to be to work through this, and I'm never giving up. And what's the big key word that I've tell my couples and that I told you guys last week? Never use the D word. That's right. Never use the D word. Never use divorce. If it's not an option, then you're never going to give up. If divorce is never in your vocabulary, never used as a threat, then when your expectations, as high or low as they may be for your spouse, when they're not met, because there's going to be several that aren't met, you're willing to say, okay, either I was wrong or we need to talk about this and hammer out these details, because I'm not giving up on you, because my love for you is so much deeper than expecting supper to be ready at 5:30 every day. You know, it's so much deeper than me having these expectations on you when it comes to intimacy. It's so much deeper than any of these preconceived understandings of marriage that I've seen on TV, that I want to work through it. I want to hammer out the details because I love you. And Scripture tells me love never gives up. And if love doesn't give up, I'm not giving up on you either. Our next one is love doesn't want what it doesn't have. Again, we see these pictures. We see these couples on TV. Oh, look what they've got. You know, she's doing this for him, and or he's doing that for her. You know, that's a perfect picture of love. And so we say, baby, why don't we have that? Why don't we have what this couple has? Why don't you have dinner ready for me every day? Or, you know, she may be saying, why don't you have put that nice jewelry on me like he's given her. He went to Jared's or whatever the case may be. You know, we put these expectations on based on TV shows, on sitcoms, on these idealized marriages and these idealized couples. And so when we see that in other relationships, oh, we don't have that. My wife should be doing that for me. But if I really love my wife, if I wanted my relationship to last because God set us a covenant that literally till one of us dies, till we both gone, then I'm not going to worry about what I don't have. We're going to talk about it, and I'll say, I really would like this in our relationship. And she may say I'm crazy, or I may tell her that that's really out of my wallet and credit limit or whatever it may be. We're going to work through it because I'm not going to stress over what other people have in their relationship. I want to focus on what God has given us. If there's issues, yes, let's deal with it. But let's deal with it in a way that never gives up. Another one, doesn't force itself on others and isn't always me first. That goes to the selfishness factor. Again, when we were single, or you say single, you weren't married, you may have been dating, you could be selfish a little bit. You were still on your own. You could do your own thing, be on your own schedule, have your own time, because you were on your own. You were who you were, and that was it. But as a married couple, and as somebody who loves one another, we say, okay, it's not about me. This relationship isn't close to being about me. I'm not even the center of this relationship. I hope God is. But love is focused on saying, I've got expectations, and I've got these understandings of what a marriage is supposed to be, but I'm willing to work through these things because, you know what? I'm not worried about forcing these preconceived ideas on you just because that's what I had in mind. I'm not willing to force these understandings on you because it's not about me. I would much rather it be about you underneath, coming second to God than saying me, God, then you, or me, you, then God. We get it twisted so often. It's God and then our spouse, then our family. If we could realign that and say it's not about me because my love is so much deeper than that, then when those expectations come and they try to tear down those walls, they try to tear down that trust, they try to tear down just a little bit more love in the relationship, then we say, hold on, wait a minute. I know I want this, and I know I've seen it, and I thought it was an ideal understanding of marriage, but I've now realized that I'm being selfish. I'm focusing on me and what I want and what I expect out of a marriage, when what we should be saying is, I want to give this marriage to you first, God, and then I want to be to support my spouse. I want to give them what they need. And then, Lord willing, they're going to reciprocate that back where, in a sense, you are slightly being selfish because God promises, put Him first. He's going to bless you. So if you're giving it to God, you're like saying, all right, I'm ready for these blessings, God. So in a sense, it is a selfish understanding, but it's a right kind because we're giving it to God and letting Him take care of the other issues. And so if we're not forcing ourselves on those, we're not forcing our understandings of marriage on our spouse, and if we're not keeping it about ourselves, then there's love there, and we're willing to make sure that love overrules any other understanding or misunderstanding of what our marriage is supposed to be like. And speaking of that, I came across a story, a lady named Nicole Hawthorne. She realized this understanding of expectations early on in her marriage. They had been married for 3 months, so they were still in what, of course we call the honeymoon phase. And they were still, every one of these is, of course, that's us. Love is so strong. It goes past even his body odor, whatever, that's the honeymoon phase, right? We overlook all these little quirky habits that in 10 years get annoying. But right now, she's still in the honeymoon phase. Things are exciting. Things are good. But one morning, she was getting ready for work. She was sitting down with a cup of coffee, watching the news, and she just began to grumble to herself, why do I have to go to work? Why can't my husband support me? Why can't he make all the money and let me stay home? And she sat back and said, why did I just say that? Why am I thinking this to myself? She even recalls saying, that's not what I believed, but it came out because deep down there was this expectation of a traditional marriage that she had. Even though they needed the income, even though she enjoyed her job, that preconceived expectation in marriage came out to where if she let it build, she would become angry with her husband. He'd come home and she'd be like, "Can't believe you made me go to work today." "Oh, good to see you too, baby. What's happening?" Because she let that expectation build up and allowed it to simmer in her, where she became angry with her husband for not meeting an assumed expectation. Even she admits that that's not what I wanted. That's not what I believed. But deep down, she felt those expectations coming back. And she had to fight those because that's not the type of marriage she had. That's not the relationship they had worked out. If it was, great. They had dealt with it. They had talked about it. But she had to fight that little bit of anger, that little bit of annoyance with her husband because she had that old expectation rising in her, and she had to fight that. And she even said she laughed about it because it shocked her that that was still a part of who she was. It was still maybe based off of her parents or her grandparents, based off of a TV show she used to watch. She does say she spent way too much time watching the Donna Reed show, which I've never heard of, but I don't know if any of you have watched it, but she spent too much time watching that, and it gave her that idealized understanding of a traditional marriage. The man goes to work, the lady stays home, and that's what deep down she wanted, but she didn't realize it until it showed and reared its ugly head, and she said, "Why am I thinking this?" And it's because expectations can be dangerous. And the truth is, unspoken, half-hidden expectations about married life put wives and husbands to the test in the realization stage. When the honeymoon phase is over, when things start really to show their ugly head, old habits, little quirks they start to show up, they start to get annoying, that's when these expectations, okay, I'm coming in for the kill, and they come in, they tear down these walls of trust, they tear down these walls that we've built during the honeymoon phase of all this, there's so much love. And so when these expectations that are unspoken and assumed aren't met, one day I just all of a sudden fly off the handle on my wife because, again, we're not meeting this understanding of marriage. And so I get upset because I read a book and it had this awesome couple that I wanted us to be like. I wanted us to replicate this couple, this relationship. But I never told her. I just expected her to be like the lady in the book or in the TV show. And somehow at a deeper level, we just assume that intuitively our spouse is going to automatically know our deepest expectations and our deepest desires in marriage. But way too often we just assume, don't we? And when we assume, we throw these things on our spouses that can, in fact, destroy our marriage. And so when we allow them to build up, they do hurt. They do hinder our growth as a couple. They hinder our trust and sometimes tear down the walls of love where one thing leads to another and separation, divorce, and moved on to put expectations on somebody else. All because we were putting these high standards on somebody that we never told about. And we just left it assumed that you're going to meet my standards whether you like it or not, but never tell them what our standards are. We can't do that because we find out that that's one quick, surefire way that we can destroy our marriages. Because in reality, and thinking about, okay, where do we get these expectations from? We know they're there. We know we've got to fight it. But where do we draw these expectations from? We get them from basically just two wells, if you want to call it. The first one is dating. We get an understanding of relationships. We get an understanding of marriage in our dating. We say, man, this dating life is so perfect. So married life is going to be 100 times better than dating. I've got a small picture of love and of relationships here in our dating relationship. So therefore, it only makes sense that if this is so good, this is so much of a utopian of love that we think, oh, if spending 20 hours together a week is amazing, then spending an entire life with them is going to be that much better. And so we're going to plunge into this thing called married life because we're that much deeply in love. We just care for one another that much. But think about it. In the dating world, Again, you could be slightly selfish, couldn't you? When you didn't want to be alone, what did you do? You got dressed, you went and spent time with your boyfriend or girlfriend. When you wanted to be alone, okay, baby, I got to go. I'll see you tomorrow. You were able to go off, do your own thing. When it came to a financial decision, what did you do? You went and bought something. You didn't ask. You didn't assume that it was going to hurt their feelings because you didn't ask them, or that you didn't clarify it with them on whether we had the funds or whether it was in the budget. We just went and bought stuff. I'm a bachelor. If I've got $20 and I want to go buy this, then I'm going to go buy it. No problem at all. And that's okay. But that's the dating world. And so when these things try to flip over into our married life, these expectations on time and quality time especially, and on finances and decisions that we've been so used to making on our own, when it comes to, hold on, I've got to bring it up with you before I go spend $20. That's not right. Well, you're now together as one individual. You're working together as a family unit. Talk about these things, deal with these things. But if you're making expectations on, I'm going to spend what money I want to spend, regardless of what our budget says and regardless of the budget you made, then you can see how the picture of that trust in the relationship begins to tear down. Also, when it comes, again, to disciplined children, I had expectations, and I saw couples when we were dating, how they discipline. That's my picture of it, and so I expect that between us. But again, everybody's different. So the first well that we draw it from is the dating world, our relationships. If our time together was so perfect in our little moment of time, our little point of history, then the married life is going to be that much greater. And these expectations I learned as a bachelor or bachelorette, I'm just going to assume they roll over because it makes sense. That's what I've done for so long, that it's who I am. Of course my wife's going to understand. Of course my husband's going to understand. That's who I am. That's what's going to take place in our relationship. The other well that we draw from is the marriage that you saw firsthand while you were growing up. More than likely it was your parents. If you didn't live with your parents, you saw maybe grandparents or guardians that you live with. You saw relationships around you. And maybe that was a good thing. For good or bad, we draw our expectations from our parents' relationships. Often we assume that, okay, that's what married life looks like. That's my mom and dad. That's marriage. And I assume when I get married, that's what me and my wife are going to look like. Hopefully God blessed you with a wonderful picture of love. I would have said it whether you guys were here today or not, but I was blessed with a good picture of love in my parents. And yes, I made expectations off of their picture of their marriage. And yes, there were times that I put those expectations on Allison, whether assumed or spoken, because I drew my understanding from my parents' relationship. And she did the same with her parents. And yes, there were differences there that we had to deal with. But we also realized that we're two different people too. And the expectations that they have for one another as our parents don't have to meet the type of relationship that we are. We're different people. We have a different understanding of love and our relationship together. But another side is, if you weren't as fortunate, you didn't see a great picture of love. Maybe your mom or dad had several wives or husbands. They've gone through, you've had stepdads, stepmoms, and so your picture of love is just, well, when it gets old, you get a new one. That was your picture of love. That was your picture of marriage. And I hate that for you. That's a sad picture. But it is a recurring picture, throughout the world today. It's just, well, when it gets old, you go buy a new one. Go get a new one, refresher course. And if that was your picture of marriage throughout your life, you may have come in saying, well, that's how I expect my life to be. It's not that big a deal. They say it's a covenant, but it's only a covenant up until the point where she annoys me too much or he gets too aggravating and we go our separate ways. Or one side is you may say, okay, that was their picture of love, but I'm going to be better than that. I'm going to do something better in my relationships. Our marriage is going to far outweigh the marriage that I saw at my home. This marriage is not the picture that I want. This is not my understanding of love. And the picture that God's given me doesn't match this. And so I'm going to be better. My wife and I are going to last longer. We're going to work through these issues. But again, there's expectations there that are going to come up, just like the story I just shared with Nicole, that whether you like it or not, those expectations come up when things get tough that, well, I can always just give up. I can always just move on. And you've got to fight those. Or you may have expectations that may hinder your relationship because you're expecting one thing out of your spouse based on what you saw from your parents. Again, whether it's having a meal ready and, having the wife stay at home, that's what I saw my parents do. That's what I want. Well, if it is, discuss that. Don't assume those things so that these expectations don't rise up and hinder the growth and the love inside that relationship. And so, yes, even though we've got these two wells to draw from, instead of focusing purely on those two, focus most importantly on the picture of love that God gives us. One great passage out of Ephesians 4 is, yes, it's dealing with really how we communicate with anybody, how we spend time with everyone we come in contact with, but especially in marriage, because you're going to be with them hopefully to the day you die. And so it does take time. When you're matching two simple human beings together, there's going to be issues that arise that you have to deal with. But if you focus on this, it helps. And if you focus on the love that we saw in 1 Corinthians, it helps. It says, be completely humble and gentle. Be patient, bearing with one another in love. Make every effort to keep the unity of the Spirit through the bond of peace. That kind of goes back to what we read in 1 Corinthians, isn't it? Talking about it's not about you. You have to be patient. You have to bear. You have to realize that we're both humans. We both have expectations, but we're both in love with one another to a point that we're willing to work through those issues, work through the quirks, work through maybe some of the annoyances, because our love is so much deeper that I'm going to remain humble. I'm going to be gentle, and I'm going to be patient, and I'm going to bear with those quirks because I know I've got a ton that my wife has to deal with, and she's dealt with for 13 years now. Not as a married couple, but she's dealt with them for 13 years, and God bless her. Keep praying for her. She has been humble. She's been patient. She's been gentle, and that's what it takes because, again, we're humans. And so don't throw these expectations, don't throw these responsibilities on your spouse based on these wells of understanding that you've developed all your life. Because especially if you wait till you're older to get married, those expectations continue to grow and they get bigger, and you put a lot more weight on your future spouse the more time that you allow between you. So the last thing I want to say that kind of culminates this is, if we truly submit to one another in love, then what we have to do is we focus on our responsibilities to our spouse more than our rights. We're all about rights nowadays, aren't we? Oh, it's my right. It's my privilege. Well, in a marriage, you know what? Focus on your responsibilities. God's going to take care of your rights and your blessings if you're keeping Him aligned. It may not be your picture of all your rights, but He's going to take care of that. So focus on your responsibilities instead of your rights, and more on what you're giving than what we get. And again, it goes back to that picture that marriage isn't about you. It isn't about me. It's about God, most importantly, and it's about keeping our spouse at the focal point under God in that relationship. Because these expectations can destroy. They will destroy your relationship. So don't let them. So last week, leftovers, those leftover time, leftover energy will destroy a marriage. But so will these expectations, especially the unspoken, assumed ones that we put in our relationship and put in our marriage, that slowly over time will deteriorate the love and the trust that you have with your spouse. So focus on those responsibilities and focus on what you can give and what you can do for your spouse.